Ethan was walking home from school, his backpack slung over his shoulder, the streets quieter than usual. The city lights flickered in the fading twilight, and the hum of cars was distant. As he took a shortcut through a dark alley, a strange sensation crept up his spine. The hairs on his neck stood on end, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just the loneliness of the evening, or maybe it was something more. Suddenly, a bright flash of light cut across the skyline, like a streak of lightning in the sky. Ethan stopped in his tracks and looked up, his heart racing. The light wasn't like anything he had seen before. It pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy. It arced across the sky, leaving a trail behind it. It was so bright that it illuminated the alley, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. Before Ethan could even comprehend what he was seeing, the light suddenly grew brighter, then exploded in a burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the air. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and he staggered backward. He squinted toward the source, seeing a glowing object plummeting toward the ground at an alarming speed. The object cut through the night sky like a shooting star, but this was no ordinary meteor. The object crashed not far from where he stood, sending a massive cloud of dust and debris into the air. Ethan's pulse quickened. He felt an overwhelming urge to find out what had just happened. Was it a plane? A meteor? A rocket? His mind raced with possibilities, but one thing was certain. Whatever it wasn't normal. He had to see it for himself. Ignoring the nagging voice in his head telling him to be cautious, Ethan took off running toward the crash site. He rounded a corner and found himself on a narrow, deserted street lined with warehouses. The area was dark, the streetlights barely providing enough light to see. The crash had created a massive crater in the ground. The surrounding pavement cracked and scorched. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Ethan approached the crater cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the wreckage of a ship, or what was left of it, strewn across the ground. Pieces of twisted metal and glowing fragments glistened in the dim light. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen before. It looked alien. Then, through the smoke, he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized it was a person, an alien. She was lying on the ground, surrounded by the wreckage, her body covered in shimmering armor that reflected the faint light from the burning ship. Her skin was a pale blue, almost translucent, with intricate markings glowing faintly along her arms and face. She was breathing shallowly, disoriented and injured, her silver hair tangled around her face. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He had seen aliens before, on the news, in movies, but nothing like this. This was real. The alien girl was real. She was hurt. He could hear her soft groans, the distress in her voice as she tried to move, but she was too weak. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he couldn't explain. He couldn't leave her here, not like this. Without thinking, Ethan rushed forward, his feet crunching on the gravel as he approached her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice unsure but filled with concern. He knelt down beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to help. The alien girl looked up at him, her wide, luminous eyes locked onto his. There was fear in her gaze, but also something else, something that made Ethan feel like he had stepped into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. She blinked slowly, as if trying to focus. I need help," she whispered, her voice strained and soft. "You must not stay. They're coming for me." Before Ethan could ask who she meant, a low, mechanical hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. The sound sent a chill down his spine. The alien girl's eyes widened in panic as she scrambled to her feet, her armor glowing brighter. "Run," she shouted, pushing Ethan back. "They will kill you." Ethan's mind raced. Who was she running from? He could hear the sound now too. Drones, dozens of them, whirring in the distance. They were closing in fast. His heart raced as he glanced around, trying to think of an escape route. He had no idea what was happening, but he couldn't just leave her here. "Please," the alien girl pleaded, her voice urgent. "You don't understand. You have to get out of here." But before Ethan could respond, she pressed a small device hidden on her wrist. In an instant, the entire area around them shimmered, and the alien girl vanished from view. Ethan blinked in disbelief, his eyes searching the space where she had been. He could still feel her presence, but she was completely invisible, cloaked by some kind of advanced technology. It was like she had become part of the environment, blending into the night. He stood still, heart pounding, listening to the approaching drones. The low hum of their engines grew louder, and Ethan realized they were dangerously close. He glanced around desperately, wondering what to do next. Suddenly, the air around him shifted, and he heard a voice in his ear. The alien girl's voice, soft but clear. "Follow me. Stay close." Ethan didn't hesitate. His feet moved on their own, following the sound of her voice. The alley seemed endless, twisting and turning, and Ethan could hear the faint drone of the bounty hunter's ships above. He had no idea what was happening, but something inside him told him he couldn't leave. He couldn't just walk away. There was something about her, something about this entire situation, that felt too important to ignore. The alien girl led him through the maze of streets, and with each step, the world around them seemed to grow darker and more dangerous. The drones were everywhere now, scanning the area for any sign of her. Ethan could feel his heart race with every passing second. The chase had begun, and now he was a part of it. As they reached a dead end, the alien girl's form flickered back into view, her armor shining brightly. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "I didn't want you involved, but now you have no choice." Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. He couldn't understand everything that was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back out now. He had already made a choice, and he would see it through. "I'll help you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "Just tell me what to do." The alien girl nodded, her expression softening for a brief moment. "Stay close, and don't trust anyone." As the hum of the drones grew louder, Ethan and the alien girl disappeared into the night, ready to face whatever danger awaited them. Ethan's life had just changed forever, and there was no turning back. Ethan's heart raced as he led the alien girl through the back door of his house, carefully closing it behind them. The night had fallen into an eerie quiet, but the tension in the air was thick. The moment they entered his room, Ethan locked the door and pulled the blinds shut, making sure no one could see them. The girl, her shimmering armor now hidden under a simple cloak, stood motionless by his bed, her wide eyes scanning the room for any potential threats. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had gone from an ordinary student, worrying about his grades and his friends, to being entangled in a situation he couldn't possibly have imagined. Aliens, bounty hunters, advanced technology. Everything felt like something straight out of a movie. But this was real. And now the alien girl was here, and she was depending on him. The girl took a deep breath, as if gathering herself. Ethan glanced at her, noticing how fragile she looked in that moment, despite the strength he had seen when she activated her cloaking device. She had been so confident, so commanding, but now there was something different in her demeanor. She looked tired, worn down from everything that had happened. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice low and strained. "You saved my life." Ethan didn't know what to say. He still couldn't quite process the gravity of what was unfolding. "What's going on? Why are they after you?" he finally asked, sitting down at his desk, trying to make sense of it all. The girl hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. She walked over to the desk and sat on the edge, her hands resting on her knees. "My name is Cal. Was part of a mission from my people, a mission to retrieve something crucial. A data set. It's stored in a satellite orbiting Earth, and it contains information that could change everything for my people. Ethan's mind raced. What kind of information? It's classified, Kale said, her voice sharp now, with a hint of urgency. But it's important, far more important than you can imagine. The people who want to stop me, they're not just interested in the data. They want control. They want to erase my species, my entire people. Ethan didn't fully understand. Erase an entire species. The thought was too horrifying. But there was something in Cal's eyes, a deep sorrow, a pain that spoke volumes. This wasn't just a mission to her. This was personal. Who are these people? Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Kale lowered her gaze. They are bounty hunters, mercenaries hired by a faction of my government that wants to stop me. I failed them, failed my mission. So they exiled me. They want me dead, and they want to make sure I can't finish what I started. Ethan stared at her, trying to grasp what she was saying. So, you're on the run, from your own people? Kale nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Yes, I was cast out for failing. And now, if I don't succeed in retrieving the data, everything will be lost. My people will be destroyed, and the entire galaxy could fall into chaos. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy for her. This girl, this alien who seemed so powerful and so sure of herself, was not invincible. She had vulnerabilities. She was on the run from forces far greater than she could handle alone. And she needed him, a regular human, to help her. A wave of protectiveness washed over him. He didn't know why, but he knew he couldn't turn his back on her now. She had risked everything to trust him, and now it was his turn to help. We can't let them stop you, Ethan said, his voice determined. Tell me what I can do. Cal's eyes widened slightly, surprised by his conviction. You would help me. You know nothing of my world or what's at stake. I may not know much about aliens or advanced technology, Ethan replied, leaning forward, but I know how to think. I know how to solve problems. If there's a way to get that data, I'll help you find it. Kale studied him for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. She seemed to decide he was trustworthy, for she nodded slowly. There is a satellite in Earth's orbit, disguised as a civilian research station. It's the key to the data I need, but I can't access it, not without help. Ethan's mind was already turning. He didn't know the first thing about satellites or military systems, but he knew enough to start asking questions. What do you need from me? He asked. The satellite is heavily guarded, Kale explained. I can't get close to it without being detected. It's embedded within a military network, so any attempt to breach it would trigger alarms. You, Ethan, you're the key. I need you to hack into the military system and disable their security, so I can access the data. Ethan blinked, taken aback. Hack into the military. He wasn't a computer genius, but he'd always been good with technology. He'd hacked into school systems before, changed his grades when he was younger. Nothing major, just harmless fun. But this was different. This wasn't a school project. This was the fate of a whole species. This was life or death. He swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll figure it out. Cal's expression softened, but the fear was still evident in her eyes. You have to be careful. These people will stop at nothing to get to me. If they find out what we're trying to do, they won't hesitate to kill us both. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. We'll be careful. As the night wore on, the two of them worked in silence. Ethan set up his laptop and began researching everything he could about the satellite. He had no idea what he was doing, but he wasn't about to let Kale down. He spent hours searching for clues, sifting through data and trying to crack into military databases. Kale sat beside him, watching intently, her alien eyes flicking between the screen and Ethan's face. She seemed impressed by his focus, but she was clearly anxious. She could feel the bounty hunters drawing closer. Ethan worked through the night, navigating through firewalls and security systems. It was slow going, but bit by bit, he made progress. Every time he cracked a code or bypassed a security measure, a sense of accomplishment surged within him. It wasn't just about technology. It was about helping Kale. Helping someone who had no one else to turn to. At some point, Kale spoke, her voice quiet. "Ethan, I have to tell you something." He paused, looking at her. "What is it?" She looked away, her expression distant, as if she were reliving a painful memory. "I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always alone. I had a family, a home, but I lost it all. Because of my failure. I was sent to Earth to retrieve the data, and I failed. My people cast me out. I was exiled, sent to this foreign planet. Now, I have nothing." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. He could see it in her eyes. The loneliness, the guilt. Kale wasn't just an alien on a mission. She was a person, someone who had lost everything, someone who had been betrayed by her own people. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I can't imagine what that must be like." Kale met his gaze, her eyes searching his face. "Thank you. For helping me. For believing in me when no one else would." Ethan's heart swelled. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. He couldn't walk away now. Kale had opened up to him, trusted him with something far bigger than either of them had anticipated, and he wasn't about to let her face this alone. "I won't let you down," Ethan promised. As the night stretched on, the countdown to their mission had begun. They were running out of time, and the dangers were closing in. But together, they would find a way to succeed, no matter the cost. The night air was filled with the sound of sirens, distant echoes of an approaching danger. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in front of the window, his eyes scanning the street. He had a strange, uneasy feeling. His house, the one place where he had thought he was safe, was now a target. A place that was supposed to feel like home now felt like a trap. And the girl, Cal, was the bait. The faint hum of advanced technology filled the room as Kale moved around, preparing herself. She had told him she would protect them both, but Ethan knew the odds were stacked against them. He was just a teenager, and she was an alien with weapons and technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Still, no amount of technology could change the reality that they were being hunted. The bounty hunters were closing in fast, and time was running out. "Are you ready?" Kale asked, her voice steady despite the situation. Ethan nodded, though his nerves were on edge. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew one thing. This was no longer just a mission for Cal. It was personal for him too. He couldn't let her face this alone. She had saved his life once, and now he would do whatever it took to protect her. There was a sudden explosion of light outside, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps on the pavement. Kale immediately moved toward the window, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the area. The bounty hunters had arrived. Their cloaked ships hovered in the sky, their sleek black forms blending into the darkness. A small army of soldiers descended from the craft, their advanced weaponry glinting in the dim streetlights. "Stay back," Kale ordered, her voice cold and commanding. She activated her personal shield, a faint blue aura surrounding her. The energy field crackled with power as she pulled out a sleek, silver rifle. Her fingers moved expertly over the controls, and in an instant her weapon hummed to life, ready for battle. Ethan's pulse quickened as he watched her. She was a warrior, through and through, powerful and graceful, a force to be reckoned with. Yet in that moment, he could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't invincible, and they were outnumbered. Even with her advanced tech, there was no guarantee they would survive this. The first shots were fired. Kale moved with lightning speed, her weapon discharging powerful energy blasts that sent enemy soldiers flying through the air. Her movements were fluid, precise, and deadly. The bounty hunters retaliated, firing back with weapons that glowed with destructive energy. Explosions lit up the street as they exchanged fire, the night sky bright with the intensity of the battle. Ethan ducked behind a table, his heart racing. He had no idea what to do. This wasn't the kind of fight he was used to. But Cale was right. He couldn't just stand there. He needed to help her. He needed to protect her. He grabbed a nearby object, a heavy metal lamp, and used it as a shield. He rushed to her side, dodging the incoming fire, and positioned himself behind her as she fired back at the bounty hunters. Her weapon hummed with energy, sending waves of power that knocked back the enemy. But the bounty hunters were relentless. One of them charged at Cale, aiming for a direct hit. Without thinking, Ethan leaped forward, throwing himself in front of her. The blast hit him in the shoulder, sending pain coursing through his body. He cried out, the force of the blast knocking him to the ground. Cale froze, her eyes wide with shock. "Ethan," she shouted, rushing to his side. Ethan's vision blurred as the pain in his shoulder intensified. Blood stained his shirt, but he gritted his teeth and tried to stay conscious. He could hear Cale's frantic voice, but his ears rang too loudly to make sense of her words. Don't die on me," Cale muttered, her voice trembling for the first time. Despite the intense pain, Ethan managed to smile weakly. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." Cale knelt beside him, her hands glowing with a soft, golden light. She pressed them gently to his wound, and the pain began to subside. "I will not let you die," she whispered, her voice filled with determination. The wound began to heal, the bleeding stopping as Cale used her alien technology to stabilize him. Ethan's breathing steadied, but the pain still lingered. He could feel the warmth of her hands on his shoulder, and the connection between them deepened in that moment. Despite her strength, despite her power, Cale had just saved his life. For the first time since they had met, Ethan saw something different in her eyes, something beyond the warrior facade. It was a rare glimpse of vulnerability. "You saved me," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. Cale looked away for a moment, as if unsure of how to respond. Then she met his gaze, and her eyes softened. "In my world, emotions like love, like compassion, are considered weaknesses. Strength is valued above all else. We are taught that showing vulnerability means we are unfit to lead, unfit to survive. But you," she hesitated, "you risked everything for me. You've shown me what it means to care for someone, to protect them, even at the cost of your own life. I don't understand it, but it's not weakness. It's strength in a way I've never seen." Ethan was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. He didn't know much about her world, or the rules she had been taught. But he knew this. What he felt for her wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing he had ever known. It was the drive to protect someone, to fight for them, no matter the odds. A blast tore through the air, snapping Ethan from his thoughts. The bounty hunters weren't done yet. Cale stood up, pulling Ethan to his feet with surprising strength. "We don't have much time. We need to move." Ethan nodded, his mind still foggy, but his determination clear. He wasn't going to leave her side. He couldn't. Not now. They moved quickly, dodging the next wave of incoming fire. Cale continued to wield her weapon with deadly precision, using gravity manipulation devices to push enemies off their feet, sending them crashing into nearby walls. Her shields were flickering, but they were still holding strong. For now, they had a chance. The night sky above them was ablaze with the chaos below. Explosions rocked the ground, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he followed Cale, every step taking them further into the heart of the battle. The bounty hunters were closing in, but they weren't going to give up without a fight. Cale fired once more, her weapon sending a shockwave that knocked back several attackers, giving them a moment of respite. "We need to get to this safe house," she said urgently, her eyes scanning the area for threats. Ethan looked at her, his determination unwavering. We'll make it." As they sprinted down the alley, the noise of the battle fading into the background, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was just beginning. They were only a small step away from the true danger that lay ahead. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan didn't feel alone. He had Cal by his side, and together they would face whatever came next. The cold, metallic surface of the satellite loomed above them as Ethan and Cal made their way through the dark corridors of the abandoned space station. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the silence, broken only by the faint hum of machinery. They had made it. After evading countless enemies and nearly losing their lives more than once, they were finally here. But the victory felt hollow. The weight of the mission, the fear of being caught, and the ever-present danger of the bounty hunters still loomed over them like an invisible cloud. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. Cal led the way, her figure glowing faintly in the dim light as she accessed the control panel at the heart of the satellite. Her fingers moved with precision, her eyes locked on the screens in front of her. She was focused, but Ethan could see the strain in her features. Every step they took had taken a toll on her. Her once steady movements now seemed slower, less sure. It was clear that the constant use of her advanced powers, the cloaking devices, and the energy shields had drained her. But there was no time to rest. As Cal worked, Ethan stood watch, his eyes darting to every corner of the room. The satellite was a labyrinth of high-tech equipment, but it was also a death trap. They couldn't afford to be ambushed again. Their enemies were relentless, and the closer they got to the data, the higher the stakes became. The bounty hunters had caught wind of their location, and they were closing in. "Are you almost done?" Ethan asked, his voice strained with urgency. "I'm trying," Cal replied, her voice tight. "I need a few more minutes. The data is heavily encrypted, but once I have it, we can destroy the core and complete the mission." Ethan nodded, trying to suppress the fear gnawing at him. He couldn't afford to think about failure now. He couldn't afford to think about what might happen if they didn't succeed. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoing from the hall. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to look to know that the bounty hunters had found them. They were too close. There was no way they could escape without facing a fight. "Cal," Ethan hissed, motioning for her to hurry. Cal's face went pale. She glanced at the door, her hand tightening around the control panel as she worked even faster. "I'm almost there," she said, but the desperation in her voice betrayed her words. The footsteps grew louder. They were almost at the door. Ethan didn't think twice. He knew that if they were going to make it, he would have to do something drastic. He couldn't let Cal face them alone. Not after everything they had been through. He had to protect her, no matter the cost. "Go," Ethan said, stepping forward. "I'll hold them off." Cal's eyes widened, her expression full of shock. "What?" "No, Ethan, you can't. You're injured already. I'll be fine." Ethan cut her off, his voice firm. "You're the one who can finish this. You need to complete the mission. I can't let you fail. Not now. Not after everything." Cal hesitated, her body tensing with the weight of the decision. "Ethan, no. I won't let you do this." But Ethan didn't give her a chance to argue. He turned and dashed toward the door, knowing that every second counted. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the bounty hunters, dozens of them, armed and ready to strike. Without thinking, Ethan hurled himself at the first one, tackling him to the ground. He fought with every ounce of strength he had left, using his body to shield Cal. The sound of blasters firing filled the air as he exchanged blows with the bounty hunters, dodging blasts and returning strikes whenever he could. But he was outmatched. They were too many, and his strength was fading. His body ached, his vision blurred with exhaustion, but he refused to give up. Not now. Not when they were so close to winning. Cal, meanwhile, continued to work at the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. She could hear the chaos unfolding behind her, the sounds of blaster fire and grunts of pain. She could feel Ethan's presence, his strength and determination, pushing her forward. She couldn't afford to fail, not when he was giving everything to help her succeed. With a final surge of energy, Kale entered the last command, the satellite's core beginning to glow as the data transferred to her. "I've got it," she whispered to herself. "It's done." But there was no time to celebrate. As soon as the data was secured, Kale activated the satellite's cloaking device, an advanced piece of alien technology that she had only used in the most extreme situations. The device pulsed with energy, sending a shockwave that wiped out the bounty hunters in the room. They were all thrown backward, their weapons disintegrating as the cloaking field overloaded their systems. The enemies who had been closing in on them were now incapacitated, their forces scattered in an instant. Ethan staggered to his feet, breathing heavily as he wiped blood from his face. He had managed to hold off the bounty hunters long enough for Kale to complete her mission, but it had come at a cost. He was battered and bruised, his body screaming in protest. But it didn't matter. They had done it. They had won. Kale's eyes flickered with relief, but her expression quickly turned to one of pain. She stumbled, her knees giving way as the energy she had exerted to activate the cloaking device took its toll. Her body trembled, and her breath came in ragged gasps. The power she had unleashed was too much, and it had drained her. Ethan rushed to her side, catching her as she collapsed. "Kale," he cried, his voice filled with panic. "What's happening? Are you okay?" Kale's eyes flickered weakly as she looked up at him, a faint smile crossing her lips. I'm fine. The mission is a success. We did it." Ethan felt a sense of relief flood through him, but it was quickly replaced by worry. Kale's strength was fading, and he knew that the cost of the victory had been too high. The energy she had expended had taken everything from her. Kale's voice was soft as she spoke, her words tinged with sorrow. "My people, they will never forgive me for this. I have failed them, and they will never accept me back. But I'm grateful. Grateful for you, Ethan, for everything you've done. You saved me." Ethan looked at her, his heart heavy with emotion. He didn't care about her people's judgment. He didn't care about the mission's success or failure in their eyes. All that mattered was her. She had risked everything to complete the mission, and now it was his turn to make sure she didn't lose everything else. "We did this together," Ethan said, his voice firm, "and I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone anymore." As the dust settled around them, the battle over and the mission complete, Ethan held Kale in his arms, knowing that this was only the beginning. The road ahead was uncertain, but with her by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had overcome the impossible, and together, they would face the future. The sun was setting on the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet field where Ethan and Kale stood. The sky, once bright and full of promise, was now tinged with shades of orange and pink, reflecting the bittersweet mood that hung between them. Their journey had taken them through unimaginable trials, and now, as the final moments of their time together slipped away, the weight of their shared experiences pressed heavily on Ethan's heart. Kale stood before him, her back straight and her posture regal, but there was a sadness in her eyes that wasn't there before. She no longer had the cold, calculating demeanor she had worn when they first met. Instead, she seemed more human, vulnerable in a way that made her all the more beautiful to Ethan. Her alien technology, her weaponry, her advanced powers, they had all been essential in helping them survive. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the connection they had forged, the bond that had grown between them in the face of overwhelming odds. "I don't want to go," Kale whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Her fingers grazed the pendant around her neck, the small alien symbol that had come to mean so much to her during their time on Earth. "But I know I must. My people will never forgive me for what I've done here. They'll never accept me again." Ethan's heart ached at the thought. Kale had sacrificed so much. Her safety, her honor, her place in her own world, all for the mission. And now she was saying goodbye. There were no words that could fully express the depth of his feelings, but he had to try. "You don't have to go," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been through so much together. I can't imagine my life without you. You've changed everything for me. You've shown me what it means to fight for something bigger than ourselves." Kale turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down, and the world around them faded into the background. It was just the two of them. Two souls connected by something greater than words could convey. "I know," she replied softly, taking a small step closer. "I've never felt this way before. I've always been trained to be strong, to never show weakness. But with you, I've learned that it's okay to care. It's okay to love. It's something I never thought I would experience. And now it's too late." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "Ethan, I've never met anyone like you." Ethan took her hands in his, feeling the warmth of her skin, the strength that had once been so cold now softened by the emotions they had shared. "Kale, he began, but the words caught in his throat. It felt like there was too much to say and not enough time to say it. "I know," Kale interrupted gently, her voice filled with understanding. "We don't need words for this. We've lived through it together. The bond we share, the love, it's real. It's something that no one can take away, not even the distance between our worlds." Ethan's chest tightened as he realized what was happening. She was leaving. They both knew it, even if they didn't want to admit it. Their paths had diverged, and no amount of wishing or pleading could change that. She had a mission to return to, and he had a life here on Earth. But the love they had found, the connection that had grown between them, was something that neither of them would ever forget. Kale took a step back, her eyes scanning the sky as her ship, a sleek, glowing craft, hovered above them. Its shape was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, smooth and shimmering like a star plucked from the heavens, reflecting the light of the setting sun as it prepared to depart. The ship's engines hummed softly, a reminder that their time together was running out. Ethan swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to rise. He had never been good at goodbyes, but he knew that this final farewell, was the hardest he would ever face. He wanted to tell her everything, how much she meant to him, how he would never forget her, how he would always carry a piece of her with him. But he couldn't find the words. He didn't need to. Instead, he took the bracelet from his wrist, the one she had given him when their journey had first begun. The alien symbols etched into the metal shone brightly in the fading light. He held it out to her, offering it as a token of everything they had been through, everything they had shared. "Take this," Ethan said softly, his voice trembling. "So you'll remember me. And remember that no matter where you are, no matter how far apart we are, you'll always have someone who cares about you." Kale reached out, her fingers brushing the bracelet. Her eyes softened as she gazed at him. "I will never forget you, Ethan. You've given me something I never thought I'd have. Something I never knew I needed. And for that, I am grateful." She took the bracelet from his hand, and for a moment, she simply held it in her palm, looking at it as if it held all the memories of their time together. Then, with a deep breath, she lifted her gaze to meet his one last time. "Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you find happiness here on Earth. I hope you live a life that is full and rich. You deserve it." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat, his chest aching as he struggled to find the strength to speak. "I will," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'll never forget you. I promise." With a final, lingering glance, Kale turned and walked toward her ship. The sound of her footsteps was the only noise that filled the air as she climbed aboard. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, and for a brief moment, Ethan could see her silhouette through the windows of the craft. She stood still, looking down at him, and in her eyes he saw the same sadness, the same love, that he felt in his heart. The ship began to rise, slowly at first, and then with increasing speed as it ascended into the night sky. The last rays of sunlight glinted off its surface as it soared higher, disappearing into the stars. Ethan stood there for a long time, watching the ship until it was nothing more than a tiny speck in the distance. His heart was heavy, but there was a sense of peace that settled over him. He had lost something precious, but he had gained something even more valuable. The knowledge that love, even in the most unlikely of circumstances, was a force that transcended all boundaries. As he turned to walk away, he looked down at the bracelet in his hand. It was a small thing, a simple token, but to him, it meant everything. It was a reminder of what they had shared, of the sacrifice they had both made, and of the bond that would never truly fade. No matter how far apart they were, no matter how different their worlds might be, they would always carry a piece of each other. And as the night sky stretched above him, full of stars and endless possibilities, Ethan knew that love, in all its forms, would remain the most powerful force in the universe. The cool night air embraced Ethan as he walked slowly through the streets, his footsteps echoing in the quiet evening. The stars above seemed to shine brighter than usual, twinkling with a sense of mystery that filled him with both wonder and sadness. His mind was full of questions, so many questions that seemed impossible to answer. What had he just experienced? Was it all just a fleeting moment, or was it something that would change everything? What was humanity's place in the vast universe, now that the events of the past days had unfolded? Ethan glanced up at the sky once again, as though hoping for some sort of sign or message. The same sky that Cal had disappeared into, now empty and silent. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than himself. The world he had known, the world of Earth, was no longer the same. The events he had lived through had opened his eyes to a much larger, much more complex universe. As he walked, his thoughts kept drifting back to Kale. Her face, her voice, the warmth of her presence, those were the things that would stay with him forever. It was difficult to accept that she was gone, that their paths had to separate. But in some ways, he understood. Her mission had been one of immense importance, and it wasn't something that could be postponed, no matter how much it hurt. She had left Earth behind, but a part of her remained with him. Their bond, however brief, however intense, was something that transcended space and time. Ethan continued his walk, the weight of the bracelet in his pocket a constant reminder of the connection they had shared. He hadn't wanted to let go, but now he realized that letting go was the only way to move forward. He couldn't hold on to the past forever. There was a new future ahead of him, and it was waiting for him to step into it. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting too. A new challenge, a new adventure. Perhaps Earth wasn't as isolated as he had once thought. Perhaps the galaxy was much closer than he ever imagined. He didn't know exactly what was coming, but deep down, he felt that humanity's place in the universe had just begun to take shape. As he reached his doorstep, Ethan stopped and looked up at the stars one last time. The sight was breathtaking. Countless pinpricks of light scattered across the vastness of the universe, reminding him of how small and insignificant he felt in comparison. But at the same time, those stars seemed to promise something. They seemed to speak of endless possibilities, of new worlds, new civilizations, and new journeys that humanity might one day be a part of. He turned to enter his house, but just as he reached for the door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a new message on the screen. It was from Kale. "Ethan, I know that this is goodbye for now, but no matter where we are, no matter how far apart we are connected. Our bond is something that can never be broken. You've shown me what it means to care, to love, and to sacrifice, and for that, I will be forever grateful. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that you've changed my life. Remember this, we are not so different, you and I. The universe is vast, and our paths may never cross again, but I will always remember you and the humanity you showed me." Ethan stared at the message, his heart swelling with emotion. He read it again, the words sinking deep into his chest. He had known she would leave, but hearing from her one last time filled him with a sense of closure. Her words were a comfort, a reminder that their connection wasn't something fleeting, something that would be forgotten with time. No, what they had shared was something real, something that would stay with him forever. He looked at the stars again, and for the first time since Kel had left, he felt a sense of peace. The universe was no longer an unknown, distant place. It was a place full of endless possibilities, and humanity's story was only just beginning. There were so many questions left unanswered, so many mysteries to solve. And while Kel might not be with him anymore, Ethan knew that he was now a part of something much larger than himself. The stars above seemed to shimmer with promise, their light guiding him forward. He couldn't help but wonder if, one day, humanity would be called upon to face new challenges, to fight alongside alien races, to explore the deepest corners of the galaxy. He didn't know if that day would come soon, but he had a feeling. No, a certainty that Earth's place in galactic affairs was only beginning. The universe was vast, and humanity was just starting to realize that it was a part of something much bigger. As Ethan stepped inside, the message from Kel still glowing on his phone, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face whatever came his way. He had learned that love and sacrifice weren't just things that belonged to one world or another. They were universal forces that could unite even the most unlikely of allies across time and space. As he put his phone down on the kitchen counter and sank into his chair, he reflected on the last few days. The battles, the emotions, the connection with Kel. All of it had changed him. It had changed his understanding of the universe, of humanity's place within it. No longer did Earth seem like a tiny, insignificant planet in the middle of nowhere. Now, it felt like the beginning of something far more important. The message from Kel was still fresh in his mind, and he found comfort in it. No matter how far apart they were, no matter how much time passed, their bond would never fade. They were connected, as she had said, by something deeper than distance or time. He couldn't explain it, but he knew it was true. As the night wore on, Ethan looked out the window at the distant stars once again. A faint glimmer caught his eye, a small fleet of ships visible against the backdrop of the night sky. His heart raced. Were they alien ships? Could it be? He wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. The story of Earth, of humanity, was far from over. There were new challenges, new opportunities, and new paths waiting to be discovered. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt hopeful about the future. With the memories of his journey with Kel in his heart and the vast universe before him, he knew that humanity's place in the galaxy had changed forever. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was full of promise. And whatever came next, he was ready. As he turned off the lights and lay down to sleep, Ethan knew that no matter where life took him, no matter how far the stars reached, his connection with Kel and with humanity's destiny would remain. It was a new beginning, not just for him, but for all of humanity. And that was just the start.